Chapter 1. The Smog of '95. The air in Los Angeles was a thick, yellowish soup of exhaust and disappointment. Miller sat in his office, the neon sign from the liquor store across the street, pulsing like a migraine. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a reason to finish his lukewarm bourbon. Then Vance walked in. Vance was a disgraced ex-cop with a suit that cost more than Miller's car and a temperament like a live wire. "We've got a live one, Miller," Vance said, tossing a glossy photo onto the desk. It was Misty Rain, a porn star found dead in a bathtub of expensive champagne. The cops are calling it an OD. But the girl she was living with, a runaway named Sarah, is gone. And the names in Misty's address book? They reach all the way to the governor's mansion. Miller looked at the photo, then at the grime under his fingernails. LA doesn't have heroes, Vance. It just has people who haven't been caught yet. He grabbed his jacket. The city was screaming, and for once, he decided to listen. They headed down to the Sunset Strip, where the shadows were deeper and the blood stayed wet longer. Chapter 2. The Exile. London was a memory Jack Thorne wanted to cauterize. The job in Whitechapel had gone south. 3 dead bodies and a suitcase full of not his business. Now he was in a safe house in Brooklyn, staring at a kid named Leo. Leo was the son of Sal Vitale, a man who could have Jack erased with a phone call. "You're going to show him the ropes, Jack." Sal had wheezed, smelling of expensive cigars and cheap death. "Make him a man. Show him what happens when you pull the trigger." Leo was 18, wearing a tracksuit and an expression of terrified arrogance. Jack lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his scarred knuckles. He didn't want to be a mentor. He was a mechanic. He fixed problems by removing people from the equation. "Rule 1, kid," Jack said, his voice like gravel in a blender. "If you're going to kill a man, don't look at his eyes. Look at his throat. It's less personal that way." The boy paled. Jack realized this wasn't just a babysitting gig. It was a death sentence draped in silk. Chapter 3. The Actors and the Iron. The mud in the Balkans was cold, clinging to the boots of 5 men who were supposed to be the biggest stars in Hollywood. They were filming The Iron Ghost, a big-budget epic about British commandos in World War II. Danny, the lead, was complaining about his trailer's espresso machine when the first mortar hit. It wasn't pyrotechnics. It wasn't movie magic. It was a 120mm shell that turned the catering tent into a crimson smear. The local militia hadn't checked the filming schedule. They just saw uniforms and foreign invaders. "Get down. This is real," Danny screamed, diving into a trench that smelled of rot and ancient wars. Beside him, his co-star, a method actor named Elias, gripped a prop Lee-Enfield rifle. "It's not loaded, Danny." Elias sobbed, the sound of machine gun fire shredding the air above them. "The Germans didn't kill the commandos in '43, Danny hissed, his adrenaline finally drowning out his ego. "But these bastards are going to kill us unless we start acting like the soldiers we're pretending to be." They weren't in Hollywood anymore. They were behind enemy lines, and the script was being written in lead. Chapter 4. The Summit of Shadows. The secure line in the Oval Office didn't ring. It hummed, a low-frequency vibration that signaled the end of the world as they knew it. President Samuel Hayes sat beneath the portrait of Lincoln, his face etched with the weariness of a man who knew too many secrets. On the encrypted screen was Prime Minister Alistair Vance, broadcasting from a bunker beneath Whitehall. "Samuel," Vance said, his voice brittle, "the GCHQ has intercepted a data packet from the Zurich exchange. It's not just a cyber attack. It's a roadmap for a decapitation strike. They aren't going after our economies anymore. They're going after us. Personally. A foreign adversary, a shadowy conglomerate known only as the Aegis, had infiltrated the highest levels of their respective security details. The men they trusted to take a bullet for them were the ones currently being paid to fire it. We can't trust the Secret Service, and you can't trust the Met," Hayes whispered, glancing at the closed door where his detail stood guard. "We are 2 men on islands, Samuel," the PM replied. "The conspiracy spans from the streets of LA to the hit squads in London. We need to go off the grid. We need to find the people who don't exist on any payroll." They were the 2 most powerful men on Earth, and for the first time in history, They were completely alone. Chapter 5. The Glass Menagerie. Back in Los Angeles, Miller and Vance were breaking into a high-rise apartment in Century City. This wasn't a cracked den. It was a minimalist nightmare of glass and chrome belonging to the late Misty Raines producer. The air smelled of expensive bleach and ozone. "Look at this," Vance muttered, kicking aside a pile of snuff films hidden behind a false wall. "This isn't just porn, Miller. These are leverage tapes. Look at the faces." Miller leaned in, his stomach churning. In the grainy footage, a high-ranking British diplomat was caught in a compromising position with the missing girl, Sarah. But the background of the video showed something even more chilling. A calendar on the wall dated 3 weeks into the future, and a map of the Prime Minister's travel route through D.C. "This wasn't a murder, it was a cleanup," Miller said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Misty wasn't a star, she was a courier. And Sarah, she's the only witness to a plan that's bigger than a missing girl. They're going to kill the PM on U.S. soil. Just then, the sound of a silenced pistol hissed through the glass door. The professionals had arrived to finish the job. Chapter 6. The Butcher's Apprentice. In a derelict warehouse in Red Hook, Jack Thorne stood over a man tied to a chair. The man was a low-level snitch for the Aegis, and Jack needed names. He handed a serrated blade to Leo, the crime boss's son. The boy's hand was shaking so violently the metal rattled against his watch. "He's begging, Jack," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "He's crying. He's a piece of software, Leo. He's got information, and we need to extract it," Jack said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "The world doesn't care about your conscience. It cares about results. If you don't do this, his friends will come for your father. They'll come for you. In this life, you're either the butcher or the meat." The warehouse was cold, the sound of the Atlantic lapping against the rotting piers outside. Jack watched as the boy's face slowly hardened, the innocence curdling into something sharp and ugly. It was a transformation Jack had seen 1,000 times. He was creating a monster to fight monsters. As Leo stepped forward, Jack's burner phone buzzed. It was a message from an old contact in the British military. "The protocol is active. We need a cleaner in the States. Immediate extraction." Chapter 7. The Ghost Commandos. Deep in the bowels of a nondescript office building in Hereford, Colonel Harrison stood before a map of the Balkans. The Iron Ghost film set had gone dark, and the intelligence reports were grim. The actors were trapped in a crossfire between local insurgents and a highly trained mercenary group, the same Aegis operatives causing chaos in D.C. and London. "We can't send a standard battalion," Harrison growled to his staff. "The optics are a nightmare. We need ghosts." He turned to a file on his desk. It contained the names of a small, disgraced group of specialists, men officially discharged for excessive force, but unofficially kept on a leash for jobs that required a certain level of brutality. They were the Strike Team 5. Their mission was simple: drop into the war zone, retrieve the high-value assets, the actors, and eliminate any Aegis contractors on site. "Load the C-130, Harrison ordered. "Tell the boys they're going hunting. And tell them if they're caught, they're just mercenaries looking for a payday. The Crown doesn't know their names." As the team prepped their gear, checking the sights on their suppressed L-119A1 rifles, the air in the hangar felt heavy with the scent of gun oil and impending slaughter. Chapter 8. The Cost of a Performance. On the edge of a Bosnian ravine, Danny, the lead actor, was no longer worried about his hair. He was covered in the blood of a sound technician who hadn't moved fast enough. Beside him, Elias was stripped to his undershirt, his hands raw from digging a shallow foxhole. They were being hunted by a squad that moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. "Danny, look," Elias whispered, pointing toward the ridge. "Those aren't rebels. Look at their gear. Thermal optics, suppressed muzzles. That's private military." Danny felt a strange, cold clarity settle over him. He had spent 6 months training with SAS consultants for this role. He knew how to clear a jam. He knew how to move in a V formation. It was all supposed to be fake, but the muscle memory was there, dormant and screaming to be used. "They think we're just pretty faces in costumes," Danny said, his voice dropping an octave. He picked up a discarded flare gun and a serrated prop knife that, while blunt, was still heavy enough to crack a skull. Let's show them some method acting. We don't move until they're in the kill zone. For the first time in his life, Danny wasn't waiting for a director to shout action. He was the director now. Chapter 9, The Meeting of Evils. The 1995 LA sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over a private airfield in Van Nuys. Miller and Vance watched through binoculars as a Gulfstream jet taxied to a stop. A man stepped out, Julian Vane, the CEO of a global defense firm and the suspected architect of the Aegis Protocol. To their horror, Vane wasn't met by criminals. He was met by the chief of police and a high-ranking Secret Service agent. "It's a sellout," Vance hissed, his grip tightening on his .45. "The whole infrastructure is compromised. They're not just killing the president. They're replacing the board of directors for the entire country." Suddenly, a black sedan pulled up, and Jack Thorne stepped out, followed by a pale, stony-faced Leo. The hitman from London had arrived in L.A. Miller didn't know who the tall, scarred man was, but he recognized the aura of death that followed him. "We've got the PIS, the hitman, and the Shadow CEO all in one zip code," Miller whispered. "Vance, if we walk into this, we aren't walking out. This is where the credits roll for guys like us." "Then let's make it a hell of an ending," Vance replied, racking the slide of a shotgun. Chapter 10, The Unholy Alliance. The hangar at Van Nuys was a pressure cooker. Miller and Vance were positioned behind a stack of rusted oil drums, while Jack Thorne and Leo moved like shadows along the perimeter. The tension snapped when Leo, still green and twitchy, kicked a discarded shell casing. The metallic tink echoed through the hollow space. "Contact!" a Secret Service agent screamed, drawing his weapon. The hangar erupted into a chaotic symphony of muzzle flashes. Miller and Vance laid down, suppressing fire, but they were outgunned. Just as a mercenary pinned Miller down, the man's head snapped back from a precision shot. Jack Thorne stood 10 yards away, his suppressed pistol smoking. "Who the hell are you?" Miller yelled over the roar of a jet engine. "The guy making sure you don't die before you tell me where Sarah is." Jack growled, grabbing Leo by the collar and dragging him behind cover. Vance crawled over, his face streaked with soot. "We're the only ones not on the payroll, it seems. We've got the evidence of the coup. They're using the missing girl as a biological courier. She's not just a witness. She's been infected with something." The realization hung in the air. This wasn't just a political assassination. It was a scorched earth play. Chapter 11, The London Bridge is Falling. In London, the Prime Minister was no longer in Downing Street. He was being hustled through the Silver Maze, a series of forgotten Victorian tunnels beneath the city. With him was a single SAS sergeant he'd known for 20 years. Every other guard had been neutralized or bought. "They've cut the satellite links, sir," the sergeant whispered, checking the corner with a thermal scanner. "We're blind. The Aegis has taken over the grid. To the world, we've already been declared dead in a terrorist bombing at the summit." Alistair Vance, the PM, felt the damp cold of the tunnel walls. He was a man of policy and debate, now reduced to a fugitive in his own capital. He pulled a small, encrypted drive from his pocket, the last protocol. It contained the override codes for the global financial systems the Aegis intended to seize. "If they get this, the world becomes a company store," the PM said. He looked at his shaking hands and then at the sergeant's rifle. "Show me how to use that. If they come down here, I'm not going quietly." Chapter 12, The Balkan Baptism. The forest outside the Iron Ghost movie set was a graveyard of prop trucks and real bodies. Danny and Elias had been joined by 3 other actors. They were cornered in an abandoned stone church, their Hollywood makeup replaced by the grime of actual combat. "Listen up," Danny shouted as the first Aegis breach team approached the heavy oak doors. "We play the long night scene. Elias, you take the high ground in the belfry with the flare gun. Use the kerosene from the lamps. Make them think we have a larger force." As the door splintered under a battering ram, the actors didn't scream. They performed. They moved with the choreographed violence they had rehearsed for months. But this time, the stakes were bone and gristle. Danny swung a heavy prop mace, a relic from the church, into the chest of the lead mercenary, the impact sickeningly real. Just as they were about to be overwhelmed by the second wave, the roof of the church exploded. Four figures in matte black tactical gear descended on fast ropes, their suppressed rifles spitting silent death. Strike Team 5 had arrived. "Which one of you is the lead actor?" the lead commando asked, stepping over a corpse. "I am," Danny panted, his hand shaking. "Congratulations," the soldier said. "Your contract just got extended. We're heading to the States. There's a war starting in D.C., and we need guys who know how to play the part." Chapter 13. The Siege of Pennsylvania Avenue. The White House was a gilded cage, and the bars were closing in. President Hayes stood in the Situation Room, watching his monitors go black one by one. The Aegis virus hadn't just hit the banks, it had severed the chain of command. Outside, the sounds of a silent coup were underway, not with tanks, but with badges. "Mr. President, the Secret Service detail has been compromised," his chief of staff whispered, leaning in. "A tactical unit is moving through the East Wing. They aren't here to evacuate you. They're here to reorganize the executive branch." Hayes felt a cold spike of adrenaline. He reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a standard-issue Sig Sauer. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a man who remembered the weight of a gun from his days in the National Guard. "Then we don't go to the bunker," Hayes said, his voice hardening. "We go to the service tunnels. There's a maintenance exit that leads to the old Treasury vaults." As the heavy mahogany doors of the Oval Office began to buckle under a breaching charge, Hayes stepped into the shadows of the service elevator. The leader of the free world was now a ghost in his own house, hunted by the very men he had sworn to lead. Chapter 14. The Convergence in the Desert. The Mojave Desert at night was a landscape of jagged shadows and biting wind. Miller, Vance, Jack Thorne, and the boy, Leo, sat around a low fire in a hidden canyon. They had the evidence. They had the courier girl, Sarah, whom they had rescued from the Van Nuys hangar. But they were stuck. The PM is underground in London, the president is a fugitive in D.C., and we're sitting in the dirt. Miller spat, cleaning the grit from his revolver. Suddenly, the sky throbbed with the low-frequency hum of a stealth transport. AC-130, blacked out and running silent, banked over the ridge. It touched down on a dry lake bed nearby. The ramp dropped, and out stepped the battle-hardened Strike Team 5, followed by 5 men who looked like they belonged on a red carpet, not a battlefield. Danny, the actor, stepped forward, his face caked in real Balkan mud. He looked at the mismatched group of PIS and hitmen. "I hear you guys are looking for a way into D.C. without being seen on a satellite," Danny said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We've still got the movie's transport planes and the military-grade props. To the Aegis sensors, we'll just look like a film crew heading for a location shoot." Chapter 15. The Courier's Burden. Sarah, the girl Miller and Vance had been hunting for, sat shivering in the back of the transport plane. Jack Thorne watched her with a professional's detachment, but Leo looked at her with something else, empathy. "They put something in me," Sarah whispered to Leo, her skin unnaturally pale. "Aegis, they said I was a fail-safe. If the coup fails, I'm the reset button." Jack leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He saw the faint, bluish tint of her veins. It wasn't just a virus. It was a biosynthetic trigger designed to release a neurotoxin into the DC water supply once she reached a specific GPS coordinate. The Aegis didn't just want power. They wanted a hostage populace. "We have to get her to a clean lab," Jack said, looking at the commandos and the actors. "But the only clean labs left are under the Pentagon, which is currently being locked down by Aegis contractors." Miller stood up, looking at the assembled group of mercenaries, actors, and outlaws. "Then I guess we're breaking into the Pentagon," he said. "Vance, you ever think your PI license would get us into the most secure building on Earth?" "Miller," Vance replied, checking his shotgun. "I stopped thinking 3 chapters ago." Chapter 16. The Trojan Horse. The Pentagon didn't look like a fortress from the air. It looked like a tomb. Under the cover of Production Flight 402, the movie's heavy-lift transport descended toward a secondary landing strip. Inside the hold, The atmosphere was a jagged mix of Hollywood ego and cold, professional lethality. "Listen up," Danny said, his voice projecting with the stage presence of a man who had won 3 BAFTAs. "We're the Iron Ghost crew. We're here for a pre-authorized location scout for the war room sequence. If you twitch, if you stutter, they'll fill this plane with lead before we hit the tarmac." Beside him, the Strike Team 5 commandos were hidden inside equipment crates labeled props, pyrotechnics. Jack Thorne sat in the corner, his eyes fixed on Leo. The boy was holding a suppressed submachine gun, like it was a poisonous snake. "Don't think about the politics, kid," Jack whispered as the wheels touched the ground. "Think about the man in front of you. If he's wearing a black earpiece, and he isn't on our list, he's a target. No script, no second takes." The ramp hissed open, revealing a line of Aegis-controlled security. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. Chapter 17, The Basement of the World. While the actors distracted the guards at the north entrance with fake permits and charming smiles, Miller and Vance were moving through the service ducts. They had Sarah between them, her breathing becoming a ragged, wet whistle. The bio-trigger in her system was reaching its final stage. "We're 3 floors above the medical labs," Miller whispered into his radio. "But the hallway is crawling with Aegis cleaners." "These guys aren't rent-a-cops, Vance. They're Tier 1 operators." Vance looked at Sarah, then at the map on his ruggedized tablet. "If we don't get her to the centrifuge in 10 minutes, the aerosol release starts. This whole building becomes a gas chamber." Suddenly, the vent above them kicked open. A man dropped down with the grace of a predator. It was the Prime Minister's SAS sergeant. He looked at the PIS and the dying girl. "The PM is safe in the Treasury vaults," he said curtly. "He sent me to ensure the last protocol is uploaded. We have a common enemy. Follow me, and try to keep your heads down. I'm about to blow the power grid." Chapter 18, The Shadow Prime Minister. Beneath the Treasury building, Prime Minister Alistair Vance stood in a room that smelled of old paper and copper. Across from him, President Hayes sat on a crate of gold bullion, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt stained with the soot of the service tunnels. The 2 leaders of the free world were huddled like conspirators in a basement. "The Aegis has already sent out the press releases, Samuel," the PM said, staring at a small battery-powered monitor. "In 5 minutes, the BBC and CNN will announce our joint resignation due to ill health. They have AI-generated videos of us speaking the words. The public will believe it." "Not if we broadcast the last protocol," Hayes replied, holding up the drive. "It bypasses the Aegis encryption. It shows the world the bank transfers, the kill orders, and the faces of the board members. But we need a high-gain transmitter." "The Pentagon's roof," the PM realized. "The Global Command Array. If your mismatched band of actors and hitmen can take the roof, we can end this." "It's a suicide mission," Hayes said, looking at the door. "We're already dead men, Samuel," the PM replied, checking the chamber of his pistol. "Let's make sure we take the company down with us." Chapter 19, The Fourth Wall Breaks. The Pentagon's central courtyard, usually a place of quiet transition, had become a kill zone. Danny and the other actors were pinned behind a prop truck, the theatrical smoke grenades they'd brought providing the only real cover. The Aegis mercenaries weren't falling for the scout story anymore. They were advancing with professional coldness, their suppressed rifles clicking like predatory insects. "Elias, to the left flank," Danny roared, his voice cracking. This wasn't a rehearsal. He watched as a real bullet shattered the windshield of their truck, spraying glass like diamonds across his face. The method actor, Elias, didn't panic. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, a prop knife in one hand and a captured sidearm in the other. He had spent years studying the warrior archetype, and in the absence of a director, the archetype had taken over. He slid under a Humvee and fired 2 rounds into the legs of an advancing mercenary. "They're moving to the roof access." Strike Team 5's leader shouted over the comms, "Danny, if you and your boys don't hold this courtyard, we'll be flanked before we reach the array." "We're not actors anymore," Danny screamed back, grabbing a discarded assault rifle. "We're the Iron Ghosts. Hold the line. Chapter 20. The Red Room. Deep in the bowels of the building, Miller and Vance had reached the high-security medical lab. Sarah was gray, her eyes rolled back. Jack Thorne and Leo stood guard at the heavy steel door as Miller frantically tried to hook the girl into the automated diagnostic system. Doors breached. Leo yelled. He didn't wait for Jack's command. The boy stepped into the frame and let out a burst from his submachine gun. The recoil nearly threw him back, but he didn't stop. He saw the Aegis cleaners as the men who had threatened his father, his city, and the girl dying behind him. Jack Thorne moved like a whirlwind of steel. He didn't use a gun. It was too loud, too slow. He used a garrote and a tactical blade, moving through the smoke of Leo's gunfire to finish what the boy started. He was a butcher in a room full of surgeons. "It's done," Miller shouted, his hands covered in Sarah's blood. "The centrifuge has neutralized the trigger. She's stable. But we've got a bigger problem. The Aegis is purging the server. If we don't get the president's drive to the roof now, the evidence disappears forever." Chapter 21. The Ascent to Heaven. The stairwell to the roof was a vertical slaughterhouse. Strike Team 5 was leading the charge, but they were down to 3 men. Behind them followed President Hayes and Prime Minister Vance, 2 men who had spent their lives in palaces now climbing through the guts of a war zone. "Almost there," the SAS sergeant wheezed, his shoulders soaked in blood. They burst onto the roof. The wind whipped at their clothes. The Global Command Array stood like a giant skeleton against the DC skyline. But waiting for them was Julian Vane, the CEO of Aegis, flanked by a dozen elite guards and a waiting extraction chopper. "The world is changing, Alistair," Vane shouted over the wind, his voice calm and terrifying. "Governments are an obsolete operating system. We are the upgrade. Give me the drive, and you can live out your days in a very comfortable exile." The PM looked at the president. Then he looked at the wounded soldiers and the actors who were still fighting in the courtyard below. He stepped forward, not with a diplomat's gait, but with the heavy tread of a man who had seen the bottom of the world. "The problem with upgrade, Julian," the PM said, raising his hand to signal the strike team, "is that they're always full of bugs." Chapter 22. The Logic of Lead. Julian Vane didn't flinch. He smiled with the practiced ease of a man who owned the air everyone else breathed. "Bugs can be patched, Alistair," he said, gesturing to his guards. But before the Aegis mercenaries could level their weapons, the roof's perimeter erupted. Jack Thorne and Leo had bypassed the stairs, scaling the maintenance ladder on the building's exterior. Jack moved with a lethal economy of motion, his suppressed pistol barking twice. 2 guards fell before they could turn. At the same time, Miller and Vance burst from the stairwell, providing a second front of fire. The roof became a chaotic vortex of crossfire. President Hayes dove behind a satellite housing, the last protocol drive clutched in his hand like a holy relic. He saw a mercenary aiming at the Prime Minister's back. Without thinking, Hayes leaned out and fired his Sig Sauer. The kick shocked his arm, but the mercenary tumbled backward into the void. "The array!" the SAS sergeant screamed, clutching his side. "Plug it in. We're losing the window." Vane scrambled toward his helicopter, his cool exterior finally cracking. He wasn't a soldier. He was a shark, and he realized the water was suddenly full of blood. Chapter 23. The Master Recording. The president reached the primary terminal, his fingers dancing over a keyboard caked in grit. He slammed the drive into the port. A progress bar appeared on the massive monitors of the array, uploading 2 global broadcast satellites. 10%. 20%. "Stop him!" Vane screamed from the steps of the chopper. His lead enforcer, a hulking man with a scarred throat, lunged toward Hayes. He was intercepted by Danny. The actor had made it to the roof, his Iron Ghost costume shredded, his face a mask of sweat and gunpowder. The enforcer swung a heavy fist, shattering Danny's nose, but the actor didn't retreat. He grabbed the man in a desperate clinch, using a wrestling move he'd learned for a stunt 3 years prior. "This isn't a movie, kid," the enforcer grunted, reaching for a combat knife. "No," Danny spat, the blood from his nose spraying the man's tactical vest. "It's a wrap." He tripped the enforcer's weight, sending both of them tumbling toward the edge of the roof. At the last second, Danny grabbed a railing. The enforcer, weighted down by gear and momentum, slid into the gray DC morning. Chapter 24. The world listens. The progress bar hit 100%. Across the globe, every screen connected to the Aegis-controlled grid flickered. The fake AI videos of the president's resignation were cut short. In their place, a raw, high-definition stream of data flooded the world's consciousness. Bank account numbers, encrypted emails detailing the assassination plots, and the biometric signatures of every Aegis board member. In the 1995 LA precinct, the corrupt chief of police watched his own name appear on the most wanted list. In London, the conspirators in Whitehall found their keycards deactivated and their assets frozen. Vane's helicopter attempted to lift off, but a Strike Team 5 commando fired a shoulder-mounted projectile. The tail rotor disintegrated in a bloom of orange fire. The bird spun wildly before crashing onto the reinforced concrete of the roof, skidding to a halt just feet from the president. Jack Thorne walked toward the wreckage. Julian Vane crawled from the debris, his expensive suit burning, his eyes wide with the realization that he was no longer a god. Jack looked down at him, then at Leo, who stood nearby with his weapon lowered. "What do we do with him, Jack?" Leo asked, his voice steady. "We let the system he tried to kill have him," Jack said, though his hand twitched toward his holster. "He's worth more as a witness than a corpse." Chapter 25. The credits roll. The sun rose over a Washington, D.C. that felt different, scarred, but awake. The Pentagon was surrounded by loyalist military units who had finally broken through the Aegis blackout. Sarah was being loaded into a proper medical transport, her life saved by a pair of disgraced private eyes and a London hitman. Miller and Vance stood on the lawn, lighting cigarettes. "Back to L.A.?" Vance asked, his suit ruined beyond repair. "Yeah," Miller replied, "but I think we're raising our rates. Saving the world has a high overhead." Nearby, the Prime Minister and the President shared a silent nod. They were the architects of a new, fragile peace, bound by a secret that would never appear in the history books. Strike Team 5 vanished into the morning mist, ghosts once again. Danny and his surviving cast members sat on the bumper of an ambulance. A news crew tried to push a microphone into Danny's face. "Is it true? Were you guys really the ones who held the courtyard?" Danny looked at his hands, shaking, bruised, and very real. He looked at the wreckage of the movie set and the reality of the war he had just survived. "No," he said, standing up and walking away from the cameras. "We were just playing a part. The real heroes didn't have a script." As the world began the slow process of untangling the conspiracy, the mismatched band of survivors dispersed into the shadows, leaving behind a world that was slightly less dark than it had been the night before.